She was not the kind of woman who fell apart. She had made that decision quietly. Somewhere between the first winter of waiting and the second, when the letters stopped arriving and she had run out of good reasons to explain the silence. She had decided then, not dramatically, not with a declaration or a vow, just simply decided the way you decide to stop expecting rain in a dry season. You stop looking at the sky. You fold the hope away. And then you get on with what needs doing. Mia Shadowclaw had been the Iron Veil Pack's healer for 3 years. She knew every shelf in the healing ward the way she knew the lines of her own hands, with a knowledge that is past sight, past thought, simply part of the body. She knew which herbs needed restocking on the first morning of each new moon. She knew which roots had to be dried before grinding, and which lost their properties if they waited too long. She knew the smell of the ward in every season, cedar in autumn, dried lavender through winter, the green bite of fresh mint when the spring arrived. She knew which wolves came in on grey mornings with injuries that were not quite serious enough to explain their presence, and she always understood what they actually needed, someone to sit with them a while. She always sat. She never made them say it. She had built this life carefully, stone by stone, decision by decision. In the 4 years since she had stopped waiting for something that was never going to come back the way it left. She was sorting dried thorn bloom on a grey autumn morning, her fingers steady, her mind in the quiet, focused place it went when her hands had work, when she heard it from the corridor outside. "Grimfang," someone said, "the Alpha King's Luna. Go find Shadowclaw." Mia set the thorn bloom down, not quickly, carefully. The healing ward smelled of cedar and dried root, and the particular stillness that comes from a room that has absorbed years of people's pain and held it without complaint. Morning light entered through narrow windows in long, pale strips, falling across shelves of carefully labelled vials, across the worn wooden work table, across the drying bundles hanging from the ceiling rafters, across Mia's hands as they moved through their work. She had already prepared the thorn bloom before she heard the name. She had already added it to the mixture for old Vexen Darkfang's knee. He was 62 years old, and had been walking on that knee for 2 decades without a word of complaint, and would continue to do so until someone made him stop, and that someone was never going to be Mia, because she had long ago learned to respect a person who decides what their own body can carry. She was thinking about Vexen, about the mixture, about whether she needed to send a request for more nightshade extract before the cold months came and the mountain roads became unreliable, when the knock came at the outer door. She wiped her hands on the cloth at her belt. She crossed the ward and opened the door. The young woman standing on the step was genuinely pretty, in the uncertain way of someone who does not yet know it. Dark cloak, unfastened neatly at the throat with a silver clasp. Her dress beneath was finely made, the kind of careful that says, "I prepared for this. I just did not know precisely what I was preparing for." Her hands held the edge of her cloak lightly, without gripping. Her eyes moved across the healing ward behind Mia in quick, careful assessment, noting exits, noting the presence of others, the deeply ingrained habit of someone who has learned to check whether a room is safe before deciding to stay in it. She was 22 years old, perhaps. Her features were composed, but underneath the composure there was something that had not quite finished resolving. The look of a person who is figuring things out in real time and trying very hard not to show it. She said quietly, "My name is Zevira Grimfang. I am the Alpha King's Luna, and I was told you were the best healer in Iron Veil territory. I sprained my wrist in training yesterday, and it's not improving. I didn't know who else to come to." She said all of this plainly, without ceremony, without the weight that a name like hers could have carried in that introduction, without the performance that some females in her position might have offered instinctively. That particular smile that says, "I know who I am, and I would like you to know it too." She just said it the way you say a thing that is simply true. Mia looked at her for one beat longer than she should have. Grimfang. The word moved through her the way cold water moves through stone. Not a wave, not a crash. Nothing so dramatic. A slow, deep chill that began somewhere behind her sternum and spread outward in a quiet and thorough arc, and was finished by the time her next breath came. Her face stayed where she had put it. Her hands stayed still. She stepped aside and gestured into the ward. "Sit down," she said. "Let me look at it." The wrist was not serious. A moderate sprain, the kind that results from a training fall where the body braces by instinct and the wrist absorbs the wrong angle of impact. Mia examined it without hurrying, pressing gently along the joint with fingers that had done this 10,000 times and knew exactly what they were looking for. She watched Zavera's face for the tells, the slight tightening at the outer edge when she pressed here. Yes. Nothing torn. Nothing fractured. The joint was intact. It simply needed time and support. She kept her own face arranged in the mild, professional calm she had spent 3 years building into her expression. The healer's face. The face that said, "I am here. I am thinking about you, and I have set all the rest of myself aside for this purpose." "You should have come yesterday," Mia said. "I know. I kept thinking it would improve. They often don't." She began wrapping the wrist with slow, deliberate pressure, the kind that supports without cutting off, that holds without restricting. Zavera sat very still, watching her hands work. After a moment, she said, with the apologetic edge of someone who is not sure whether this kind of thing is appropriate to say to a healer one has just met, "I don't know many wolves in Ironvale yet. We only arrived from the Northern Territories last season. It's still unfamiliar." Mia kept her eyes on the wrap. "I know," she said quietly. And she did not explain how she knew. She did not explain that she had tracked the arrival announcement with the specific, careful attention of a woman who had been bracing for it for more than a year. She did not say that she had stood in the doorway of this exact ward when the herald made his announcement in the Great Hall, and that she had heard your name on a cold spring morning, and then turned back to her work. She said none of it. She tied the bandage neatly at the wrist. She smoothed the end flat against the skin. She said, "Come back in 3 days if the swelling hasn't gone down. Keep it elevated when you can. No training until the joint is stable." Zavera looked at the bandage, then at Mia. Something in her expression had changed. A small release, barely visible. A slight unclenching of something she had been holding without realizing she was holding it. The look of someone who has been waiting, without knowing they were waiting, for someone to simply take them seriously. "Thank you," she said. "Of course," Mia said. She walked her to the outer door and stood at the threshold as Zavera crossed the courtyard. That careful walk, upright, unhurried, maintaining the small distance from the wolves who paused and bowed as she passed, the way she nodded in return without slowing, without leaning into the attention as though she needed it. Mia stood and watched until she turned the corner at the end of the stone path. She stood there for a moment longer than she needed to. She thought, "She does not look like a woman who won anything." The thought arrived without satisfaction and without cruelty. It was simply what she saw. A young female, carefully dressed, navigating a hall full of people who bowed to her title while she tried, with visible effort, not to appear lost. Mia turned back to her work table. She picked up the thorn bloom she had set down. She finished the morning's preparation. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. That was the first thing she had always been good at, keeping her hands steady, to understand what happened next, to understand what it cost Mia Shadowclaw to open that door and say, "Come in," to step aside, and let the Alpha King's Luna sit in her ward and be cared for. You need to understand who she was before that morning. You need to understand what she had already carried, and how long and alone. Mia was 24 years old. In the Iron Vale Pack, 24 unmated was a specific and unkind thing to be. It meant that at every moon gathering, every council feast, every winter ceremony where the whole pack assembled in its careful social order, there was a particular look that certain wolves gave her. Not cruel, exactly. Patience has a cruelty of its own that doesn't recognize itself. The look said, "What a shame." She had such promise. It said it without words, without even full awareness, the way these things are often said, through the slight extra warmth of an elder's greeting, through the way certain mothers angled their unmated sons somewhere else when Maya was near, as if her situation might be catching. What happened, of course, was Alexander. But nobody knew the real shape of it. What they knew was the surface. That Mia Shadowclaw had never taken a mate. That she had been considered a strong match once. An Omega healer with rare gifts, precise and composed, the kind of female that ranked wolves noticed when they walked into a room. And then nothing. No bond declaration. No ceremony. Just Mia getting slightly older every season and appearing each morning in the healing ward with her hands busy and her face arranged, giving nothing away. She must be too particular, some said. Perhaps she's waiting for something that doesn't exist. Perhaps there was someone who didn't work out, said others, in the tone that is really saying, "I suspect I know what happened here, and I have already written the story of it in my head." What they didn't know was this. 4 years ago, Alexander Nightclaw had not yet been crowned. That he was simply Alexander, a ranked warrior who moved through the pack with the particular ease of someone who has never in his life doubted his welcome. Grey eyes that did not merely look at you, but held what you said, that brought your words back to you weeks later with the care of someone who had been turning them over the whole time. He had an attention that felt like a gift when it landed on you, not because it was false, but because it seemed rare, as if he didn't give it to everyone, as if you were specifically chosen. He had walked beside Mia through the eastern forest trails for 2 full seasons, not always in conversation. Sometimes just walking, in the comfortable, unhurried silence of 2 people who do not need to fill space between them with proof of their connection. He had said things to her, not declarations, or not formal words, nothing that could be quoted in a contract, but things that meant, by their accumulated weight, that she mattered to him specifically, that she was the person he had decided to be near. He looked at her as if she were the most interesting thing in a room that held many things. She had not imagined it. She was careful enough to know the difference between what she wished and what she received. She had received something real. She had held it with both hands and been careful with it, the way you are careful with something whose value you understand. He left in late autumn for the Northern Territories, a campaign, border disputes to renegotiate, the kind of long and complicated diplomatic work that took ranked wolves away from their packs for months at a stretch. He stood at the eastern tree line with his pack assembled behind him, and he looked at her with those grey eyes that remembered everything, and he said, "I'll be back before the spring thaw." She believed him. She believed him through the first month of winter, when the letters arrived slowly but regularly. She believed him through the second month, when they slowed further. She believed him through the third, when they stopped entirely, and she told herself there were reasons. The campaign was complex. Communication from the territories was unreliable. He was doing difficult and important work, and she was not going to be the kind of female who fell apart over silence. She was not fragile. She was faithful. She trusted. She waited. And then, one morning in early spring, the pack herald made his announcement in the Great Hall. At Alpha King Alexander Nightclaw, having completed his campaign and formally accepted the title of Alpha King, had chosen Zevira Grimfang of the Dreadfang bloodline as his Luna. The bonding ceremony would take place at the next full moon. Maya heard it from the doorway of the healing ward. She had just arrived for the morning. Her cloak was still on. She turned back inside. She removed her cloak. She hung it on its hook. She picked up the vial she had been preparing before she went to see what the herald was announcing. She finished the preparation. She labeled it. She put it on the shelf. She did not cry. Not there. Not in the ward. Later, in her room, with the shutters closed against the sound of the spring that was coming, regardless of whether she was ready for it. Yes. Briefly. One evening. She sat with it. She let herself feel the full size of it, and then she sealed it shut in the place where she kept the things she had decided not to carry in her hands. She was not going to spend more than one evening on a man who had not thought her worth the courtesy of a single word of explanation. She kept that decision. She honored it. And then she got up the next morning. What she did instead was become the best healer in Iron Vale territory. Not by accident, not by grief redirected, by decision, and then by sustained daily effort across 4 years, every single morning. Precise, present, reliable in the bone-deep way that becomes a person's reputation, their substance in other people's eyes. She showed up when she said she would. She stayed until the work was done. She never flinched at difficult cases. She gave every wolf who came through her door the same specific, unhurried attention, regardless of rank, regardless of the hour, regardless of whether it was convenient. The pack respected her for it. She was aware they also, quietly, pitied her. There is a particular kind of unmated female in any wolf pack who pours everything into her gift, and in most minds, those two facts, the dedication and the absence of a mate, are connected by a story that was never asked for, and is not accurate. The story says, she works this hard because she has nothing else. She gives this much because she was not chosen. Mia found this both predictable and insulting. She never said so. She had learned with great precision what could be said aloud in a pack and what could not. Or she had learned that an unmated Omega with a history of almost, of being seen and not claimed, of waiting and not being returned to, had no credibility in her own defense. If she said, "I waited 4 years for a man who chose someone else," and sent no word of explanation, not a single letter, not a single apology, the pack would hear bitterness. They would hear the sour, small howl of a female who had been passed over and could not make peace with it. They would decide they already knew how the story ended, and they would not hear a word she said, beyond the shape they had already given it. So she did not say it. She smiled instead. She changed the subject smoothly. She showed up at the ward each morning. She was, by every visible and measurable standard, completely fine. She was not completely fine, but she was upright. She was present. She was still herself, and she had decided somewhere in that long first winter that this, herself, intact, was the thing she was going to keep, no matter what else was taken or not given. And that decision had held. 4 years, and it had held. That mattered more than most people would ever understand. 3 days after the first visit, exactly as instructed, Zevira Grimfang came back to the healing ward. The wrist was slightly better, the swelling down, the movement marginally improved. She was carrying something in her other hand, a small glass jar sealed with pale wax, the label hand-lettered in a compact, careful script. Northern Frostberry Preserve. Mia recognized it immediately, not from sight but from memory. The smell of it when opened, something between winter and sweetness, or something that grew low and cold in the hill territories, where the berry bushes pushed through frost-hardened ground and produced fruit sweeter than anything from warmer climates. She had smelled it once before, in a letter, years ago. A leaf pressed inside a page, and the note underneath explaining, "These grow near the camp. They smell like this. I thought you should know something about where I am." She had kept the leaf for 3 months. She did not think about where it was now. Zavira held the jar out with the careful, slightly uncertain gesture of someone who is trying and is not sure they are getting it quite right. "Someone told me healers like sweet things," she said. "I didn't know what else to bring." Mia looked at the jar. She took it. She said, "That is very kind." She made tea. She set 2 cups on the work table, and the morning continued around them, slow and ordinary and unhurried, with everything unsaid kept perfectly, precisely in its place. It became a habit without either of them officially deciding it should be one. Zavira began coming to the healing ward, not always for physical injuries. Sometimes, simply in the mornings, when the Alpha King's hall was full of the noise of council business. The ranked wolves moving in their formations, the voices overlapping, the sense of important things being discussed and decided without her, and she had nowhere in particular to be that did not feel like standing in someone else's way. She would appear at the outer door of the ward with nothing visibly wrong, and the particular expression of someone who has found, against expectations, the one quiet room in a very loud building, and has decided to be grateful for it. Mia let her come. She gave her something to do, the kind of light, purposeful work that keeps the hands occupied without demanding the full attention. Sorting dried petals by shade and age, refilling the small preparation vials from the larger storage ones, organizing the herb labels on the shelves so they faced outward in consistent order. Zavira did these tasks carefully and without complaint, and she asked questions about the herbs that had the quality of genuine interest. Which ones had to be used fresh, which ones improved with age, why some preparations had to be made in moonlight, and others were best prepared at dawn. She listened to the answers the way Alexander had once listened to things Mia said, as if they mattered, as if she was going to carry them. Mia noted the resemblance and set it aside. She kept her hands moving and answered the questions, and did not dwell on it. One morning in the 4th week, Zavira asked her real question. They were sitting at the work table with tea that had gone slightly cold, the late autumn light falling through the narrow windows in those long, pale bars that seemed, in Mia's healing ward, to always arrive at exactly the right angle to make the room look both familiar and temporary. The morning was quiet around them. The rest of the pack was somewhere else, occupied with its ordinary business. Zavira had been holding something for a while, sitting with it, turning it over. Mia had noticed. She had not pushed. Then Zavira said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," Mia said. Zavira looked at her hands on the table. Or she said, "Does it get easier? Feeling like a guest in your own life? Like everything you're standing in was built for someone else's measurements, and you've been trying to fit yourself into the space without anyone noticing how wrong the shape is." A pause. Then, quieter. "Is a bond supposed to feel this one-sided? Because everyone, every wolf I speak to, tells me I am the luckiest female in the territory. And I believe they mean it. But I go to sleep most nights, feeling like I am standing very correctly in the middle of a very large, very beautiful room that was never designed with me in mind, and I don't know where to stand that doesn't feel like the wrong place." Mia did not move her face. She held the cup in both hands and listened to every single word. Oh, she recognized each one, not because she had ever been bonded to Alexander, not because she had ever stood in the Luna's place, but because she recognized the specific texture of what Zavira was describing, the feeling of being near someone whose attention made you feel like the most specific person in the world, and then the slow, painful arrival of the knowledge that the attention was real, but the promise beneath it was not. That there was a difference between being seen and being chosen. That a man could hold your image in his heart and still never choose you. That these two things, devastatingly, are not the same. You are allowed, Mia said. Her voice was steady and quiet and exact. Whatever anyone in this pack tells you about what you should be feeling, whatever the expectation is, whatever the gratitude you're supposed to carry, you are allowed to find it hard. That is not weakness. That is not ingratitude. That is the honest thing. Zavira looked at her, the way someone looks when they have been waiting in a room for a long time for a particular thing to arrive. And it has finally arrived, and they are flooded with the relief of it. The physical unwinding of a person who has been holding themselves very tightly around something difficult and has just been told, by someone who seems to mean it, that they may stop. Everyone else tells me I'll settle into it, Zavira said. Her voice was careful, as if settling is what I should be aiming for. Settling is not the goal, Mia said, and she meant it with her whole self, in the complete and specific way of someone speaking from direct experience, though she did not say so. Zavira looked at the cup in her hands. She said, more quietly, "He is attentive. He says the right things at the right moments. But I don't. I don't think I'm the person he's actually speaking to when he says them. It's as if the words are correct, but they're aimed somewhere else. Somewhere I can't see." Mia let the silence hold that. She did not fill it quickly. She gave it the full weight it deserved. Then she spoke, and every word she gave was honest, and every word was incomplete. She said, "You are allowed to name what you feel." She said, "A bond that only runs warm on one side is still telling you something real." She said, "What you are describing, the gap between what you were promised and what you have, that is information, not failure." She said all of it, and she meant all of it. And she held, but behind all of it, the thing she hadn't decided whether to say, the thing that would have explained the depth of her certainty, the thing that had a name. She kept it where it was. She gave Zavira everything else. It was a grey Friday when Draxon Silverhowl appeared at the door of the healing ward. He was broad through the shoulders, unhurried in the way he occupied space, the kind of male whose presence registered in a room before you had consciously noticed it, who moved with the ease of someone who has nothing to prove. He and Mia had been occasional sparring partners in the Eastern training yard for 2 seasons now, and they had built between them the easy, wordless rapport of 2 people who respect each other's capabilities without needing to declare it. He had been finding reasons to pass by the ward more frequently in the past month. Mia had noticed. She had kept noticing and not doing anything in particular with what she noticed. He appeared in the doorway holding his forearm out, a clean cut from training, not deep, already beginning to clot. He gave the wound the mild, faintly bored expression of a man for whom injuries are more of an inconvenience than an event. He glanced at Zavira. He gave Mia a look that held no particular message that she chose to read. She cleaned the cut. She bandaged it. She told him to keep it dry for 2 days. He said thank you and left without lingering. After the door had closed, Zavira said, "He looks at you." Maya said, "He looks at everyone." "No," Zavira said. Her voice was certain. "There's a specific way a person looks at someone they want to be around, and that's the way he looks at you. It's different." Mia returned to the vial she had been filling before the interruption. She did not answer, but she was aware of it, the observation, the warmth it carried, the fact that Zavira had seen something clearly that Mia had been choosing not to look at directly. She held it carefully, in the way she had learned to hold things that mattered, gently, not at arm's length, but without pressure, without asking them to be more than they were. That evening, walking home through the pack territory, as the light fell and the air sharpened with the coming frost, Mia thought about the word Zavira had used in that morning's conversation. Luckiest, the luckiest female in the territory, and the envy of every unmated wolf who saw her walk through the great hall beside the Alpha King. She thought about Alexander, the way she rarely allowed herself to anymore, directly, clearly, without the careful management she usually applied to the subject. She thought, he has always done that part brilliantly. The beginning, the specific quality of attention that makes you feel like the only real person in a room. He was extraordinarily good at that. He had always been extraordinarily good at it. It was the parts that came after the beginning, the maintenance, the honesty, the showing up in unglamorous ways over a long time, that he had never managed. She had simply not known that when she was standing at the eastern tree line believing him. The thought arrived without bitterness. She was aware of this and found it interesting. She noted it the way she noted things she needed to understand, and she kept walking home in the cooling evening, and she did not feel less for the clarity of it. If anything, she felt lighter. The autumn pack gathering was unavoidable. There was no version of the situation in which Mia could reasonably decline to attend, and she did not try to construct one. Every ranked wolf in the Iron Vale pack attended. Every healer of standing attended. Elder Orvella Moonclaw, small, sharp-eyed, the woman who had pressed the healer's seal into Mia's palm 5 years ago and told her she had a gift worth honoring, would have noticed an absence. And beyond that, Mia had decided months before this evening that she was not going to spend the rest of her life arranging her movements around the inconvenience of Alexander Nightclaw's presence in the same territory. She had given that 4 years. She was not giving it more. She dressed carefully, not elaborately. The distinction mattered in ways she did not need to examine too closely. She wore the deep grey of the healer's colour, well-made, properly fitted, nothing that announced itself. She arranged her hair simply. She looked at herself in the small mirror above her washing basin and saw a woman who had made a decision and was going to hold it, and was dressed accordingly. The great hall filled slowly, and then all at once, from the way these events always did. 200 wolves gathering by degrees until the warmth and the noise reached a level that made the cold outside feel like memory. The central hearth threw long orange light across the stone floor and the gathered faces. The smell was pine and ceremony, and the particular expectant electricity of a large group of animals in a small space. Mia went directly to Orvella, who was stationed near the western wall with a cup of warm, spiced drink, and the particular expression of a very old wolf who has attended enough gatherings to no longer find them impressive, but continues to show up because she understands that showing up is the whole point. "You look well," Orvella said. "So do you," Mia said. They talked about the herb stores for the coming winter, about the reliability of the mountain road once the snows came, about whether Vexon Darkfang was going to agree to the knee treatment or continue refusing it on the grounds that he had survived without it for 20 years, and saw no compelling reason to change now. It was a genuine conversation. Orvella had strong opinions about dried winter moss, and Mia found she agreed with most of them. And for a while the gathering moved around her, and she moved through it, and everything was as it had been for the past 4 years, managed, Navigable? Fine. And then she felt it. The particular shift. Not sound, not sight. Something more animal than either. The quality of attention landing on her from across a large room. She had felt it before, in different years, in better circumstances. Her body recognized it before her mind had consciously reached for the memory. She finished the sentence she was speaking to Orvella. She turned her head. Alexander Nightclaw stood near the entrance, still in his travelling fur, the mark of his rank at his collar, with the ease of a man who has never in his life questioned his right to the position it signifies. He was broader at the shoulders than she remembered. His face had settled into itself in the way faces do in the later 20s, less of youth's softness, more of the bone. The grey eyes were the same. They were on her. For 1 second, exactly one, they looked at each other across the full length of the hall, across the heads and shoulders of 200 wolves, across 4 years of silence and everything that silence had contained. Then she turned back to Orvella. She continued speaking. Her voice was level. Her pulse was doing something that she noted the way you note weather, clinically without alarm, and then continued. He crossed to her, eventually. She had known he would. In a space this size, with this particular history between them, deliberately avoiding each other would itself be a message, and she was not interested in sending one. She had nothing left to say to the situation through the language of avoidance. She had said everything through 4 years of silence. She was done with that. He appeared at her side by the fire with the ease that had always been his signature. The particular confidence of a man for whom arriving is never awkward, for whom rooms simply accommodate his presence. He was a man who had never walked into a space and wondered if he should be there. Dormia, he said. Her name. Not the formal title, easy on his tongue, as if he had been keeping it warm. She said, Alexander. Not your Majesty, just his name, returned to him as plainly as he had given hers. She watched him register it, a small thing, a slight adjustment in his expression that lasted perhaps half a breath. She noted it without satisfaction. It was simply information. He said she looked well. She said so did he. She held his eyes when she said it, civil, warm enough to be polite, cool enough to be honest. In her imagination, in the 4 years she had been carrying this, she had rehearsed versions of this conversation in which she said more, in which she asked him to account for himself, but in which she found exactly the right words to make him understand precisely what the silence of his absence had done to a person who had trusted him enough to wait. But looking at him now, in the firelight of the great hall, she found she had very little to add. Nothing she might say would change the shape of what had already happened. The 4 years were the 4 years. She was who she was now because of them, and she would not give that back even if she could. So she let the silence between sentences hold, and she did not help him fill it. He was the one who filled it. He shifted the conversation sideways, the way charming people do when they sense ground they would rather not be standing on, to Zavira, to the healing ward, to the fact that his Luna had mentioned Mia had been kind to her. His voice was easy, pleasant, the voice of a man who has long practice navigating surfaces without going deeper than he intends to. Mia said, "She is easy to be kind to." She held his gaze when she said it, and let him interpret it, however he needed to. She did not assist him. He moved away shortly after. The exchange had lasted perhaps 5 minutes. She went in search of Zavira, and found her near the far wall, with a cup she was holding in both hands. That familiar, contained posture, the carefully maintained, pleasant expression of someone who has been performing ease for long enough that it has begun to weigh something. Her face shifted when she saw Mia. The relief was real. They spent the rest of the gathering together at the edge of the room, talking about ordinary things. The quality of the spiced drink, the likely date of first snow, whether the eastern path would flood before midwinter, as it had last year. The gathering moved around them, and they moved through it together. And it was, mere thought, a reasonable evening. Not the evening she had feared. Not the evening she had been quietly bracing for since the invitations were distributed. A reasonable evening with a woman whose company she found, to her genuine surprise, consistently worthwhile. At one point she glanced across the room. Alexander was watching them, both of them, together. His expression carrying that particular, careful blankness that Mia recognized as the stillness of a man whose face has gone quiet, because something underneath it is not. She looked at him for one moment. Then she looked away. Walking home, the first frost of autumn was beginning on the grass at the edge of the path. A thin white line along each blade, like a careful decision someone had made while the rest of the world was sleeping. The air was clean and cold, and the sky had gone that deep navy that happens for about 20 minutes in late autumn before it becomes fully dark. She thought, I wonder what he felt, watching us. And then, with a quiet and genuine surprise that she examined and confirmed, she found she did not particularly need to know. She kept walking. The frost glittered at the edge of the path. She did not look back. There was nothing dramatic in the beginning. Zavira would remember that afterward, in the difficult weeks that followed, the way you remember the mundane details of the moments that change things, that it had been an ordinary morning, that she had been asked to do an ordinary thing. But Alexander needed a document from the war chest in his chamber, a border treaty scroll, old, administrative, something to do with the Eastern Territory boundary, and a negotiation that had been pending for months. He was in council session. Would she retrieve it? It should be on top, he had said. It would not take a moment. She went to the chamber. She found the chest. She opened it. The scroll was on top, exactly as he had said. Rolled neatly, sealed with the campaign sigil, the East Border insignia on the binding cord. She picked it up. Her other hand, reaching in to close the lid, settled against the folded campaign cloak beneath the scroll, and in the lower corner of the chest, beneath the cloak, her fingers found something small, round, worn, smooth. She almost did not look at it. She looked at it. A bone pendant, carved carefully, the kind of carving done over a long time, with patience, with the intention of something lasting. Small enough to sit in a closed fist, worn to an almost silky smoothness from handling, the way objects go when they are held in the dark, again and again, over years, when no one is watching. There was text engraved along the back edge in small, careful letters. One name, Maya. Zavira stood very still, beside the open chest, with the pendant in her palm, and the border treaty scroll under her arm, and the morning light coming through the chamber window, cold and clear and indifferent. She had seen it before. She was certain now, a certainty that arrived not from sight, but from the body, from a memory she had stored without labeling it. Late nights, twice at minimum, perhaps 3 times, coming back to the chamber quietly, not wanting to disturb him if he was resting, finding him awake at the window with his back to the door, his hand turning something small in the dark, his face toward the glass, and whatever was on the other side of it. She had not asked. She had told herself it was a campaign habit, a soldier's object, something old and private. She had believed this because she had needed to, and because believing it was easier than asking the question that lived on the other side of it. She put the pendant back, precisely where she had found it, in the lower left corner, beneath the cloak, exactly as it had been. She closed the lid. She took the scroll downstairs. She found Alexander, gave it to him. He looked up briefly, said thank you, returned to his documents. She said, "You're welcome." She returned upstairs. She sat at the window of her dressing room for a while, looking at the courtyard below, where the pack moved through its ordinary morning. And she did not allow herself to think past the edge of what she had just seen, because the edge of it was already too large to hold all at once. She did not go to the healing ward that day, or the one after, or the one after that. Mia felt the absence from the third day. She watched the outer door of the ward during the hours Zavira normally came. She did not pursue it immediately. She had too much experience with the difference between a person who needed to be found and a person who needed to be allowed the distance they were taking. She waited. She did her work. She maintained the quiet, watchful patience that had become, over 4 years, as natural to her as breathing. On the 8th day, a note arrived from Zavira's personal attendant, Kairova Bloodhowl, polite and precise, citing a schedule conflict, cancelling the next appointment. Nothing in the language was openly cold. Everything in the language was managed. The careful, controlled courtesy of a message composed by someone who needs to create distance and is determined to do it properly. Mia read it twice, set it on the work table. She felt, somewhere below the calm she kept above everything, the specific shift of knowing. The kind the body registers before the mind has found language for it. She didn't panic. She didn't perform calm. She simply was calm, in the way she had learned to be calm about things she couldn't control, by deciding in advance that whatever came through the door was something she was already prepared to face. In the second week of the distance, Draxon found her in the eastern training yard at dusk. She was sitting on the wide stone boundary wall at the edge of the yard, facing the tree line, her back to the pack buildings, her hands in her lap. She was not particularly doing anything. She was simply being somewhere quiet with what she was carrying, which was sometimes the most sensible thing a person could do. He came and sat beside her. Not close enough to crowd, not far enough to be distant. The exact, unhurried placement of someone who has spent time near people in difficulty and knows where to be. He did not ask what was wrong. He was very good at not asking what was wrong in a way that made you want to tell him. They sat together for a while in the cooling evening, watching the tree line go dark by degrees. Then he said, "You don't have to explain things to me." She looked at him. He was looking at the trees. "I know," she said. "I just wanted you to know," he said, "that I'm here. Whatever here means to you. Whatever you need it to be." He had never spoken that directly to her before. He had always been present, attentive in the particular understated way that was his character. But this was different. This was the real thing, said plainly, without dressing it up or making it smaller than it was. She held it with both hands, carefully, without gripping. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. He did not elaborate. They remained on the wall until the light was fully gone, and when she stood to leave, he walked with her to the edge of the ward path and said good night, and went his own way. And she went hers. 13 days after Zavira's last visit, a folded note appeared at the outer door of the healing ward. Not a formal letter, not delivered through an attendant. A piece of ordinary paper, folded once. No seal, no signature. 4 words. "Can I come today?" Mia picked it up from the floor where it had been slipped beneath the door. She held it. She looked at the handwriting, small, careful, the compressed neatness of someone who had learned to write with precision and could not turn it off even in informal notes. She set it on the work table. She went to the window. She looked at the sky, the particular pale grey of a late autumn morning that has not yet decided what kind of day it wants to be. She thought about everything she had given Zavira over the 6 weeks of their friendship. Every word of counsel she had offered, every morning, every cup of tea, every honest thing she had said. She thought about the shape of the council, that it had every time pointed Zevira toward herself, not toward Alexander's failings, not toward what Mia knew, toward what Zevira herself was feeling, was allowed to feel, was permitted to name. That had not been a performance. That had been exactly what Mia had meant to give. She went back to the table. She picked up her pen. She wrote 4 words in her clearest hand. Yes. First light. She spent the evening sitting by the ward fire with a book in her lap that she did not read. She was not preparing what to say. She had learned, over 4 years of hard things, that preparing the words was less useful than preparing the person who would have to say them, so she sat with herself in the quiet evening. And she decided, not for the first time, but with new specificity, that she was not going to come apart under whatever came through the door tomorrow. She had carried this for 4 years, alone, without acknowledgement, without the relief of speaking it. She could carry 1 more night, the fire burned down to embers. She banked it. She went to bed. She did not sleep easily. But she slept. First light came in reluctantly, the way it does in late autumn, the sky going from black to charcoal, to a grey that was not quite morning and not quite night. The world paused at its own threshold. Mia was already in the ward when the knock came. She had been there for an hour, not doing very much, feeding the fire, straightening things that were already straight, existing in the space with the awareness that something was coming and choosing, deliberately, not to brace against it. She opened the door. Zevira looked different. Not dramatically. No evidence of weeping. No visible anger. Nothing that performed distress. But she had the specific look of a person who has spent 2 weeks carrying something alone and has stopped performing the effort of making it look light. Something in the set of her jaw. Something in the way her hands were still at her sides rather than managing her cloak. She was holding something in her right hand, fingers closed around it. She came in without speaking. She sat. Maya sat across from her. The fire was new lit and beginning to catch properly, the smell of pine smoke filling the ward's cold morning air. Outside, the pack was still quiet. The morning belonged to them. Zevira looked at her hands. Then she raised her eyes to Mia's. "'Twas you knew him," she said. Her voice was controlled, wound with great care around something larger, held there by sheer discipline. Mia said nothing. She waited. "Before me. Before the ceremony. You knew him." She opened her right hand. The pendant lay on her palm, small, worn smooth, the carved name perfectly legible even from where Mia sat across the table. Mia looked at it. She had not seen it since the last autumn she and Alexander had walked this trail, since the day he had asked her to keep it, and she had pressed it back into his hand and said, "Carry it yourself." Something from home. She had not forgotten she'd said that. She had not forgotten anything. She raised her eyes from the pendant to Zevira's face. "Ask me what you want to know," she said. Zevira held her gaze. When she spoke, her voice had gone quieter, not softer, quieter. The specific quality of someone who has decided to ask the real thing instead of the thing that orbits it. "Did he choose you first?" The question sat between them like a third presence in the room. Mia held it for a moment. She did not answer quickly. She did not perform certainty or false calm. She let it rest there in its full weight. And then she answered it honestly. "He let me believe he would. For 2 full seasons he walked beside me. He looked at me the way a man looks when he has decided. He left for the Northern Territories and told me he would come back before the spring thaw. He did not come back. He sent no letter of explanation. No word of any kind. I found out that the bonding was happening through the herald's announcement in the Great Hall. I was standing in the doorway of this ward when I heard your name. The pendant lay on the table between them. Neither of them reached for it. It sat there in the morning light like a fact that had always existed and was only now being looked at squarely. Nothing worth mentioning, Mia said quietly, almost to herself. That is how he described what we had, to someone, once. The words reached me second-hand, some months after. Nothing worth mentioning. That was the measure he gave it. The silence that followed was long and full. Severa stood. Not abruptly. The way you stand when your body is too full of something to remain seated any longer, and you need to move or you will say something wrong. She went to the window. She stood with her back to Mia, looking out at the pale early courtyard. Was the frost still thick on the stones below? Her shoulders were very still. Her breathing was controlled. After a long moment, she said, without turning, "All those mornings, everything I told you, you sat across from me every single morning, and you knew. And you said nothing." "Yes," Mia said. Severa turned. Her expression was complicated, not simple fury, not simple hurt, but the more difficult thing that lies beneath both of those, the specific betrayal of someone who trusted and has had to revise the shape of what they were trusting. She was working through it in real time, and Mia could see her doing it, and she did not interrupt the process. "That's all you have to say?" "You haven't asked me your real question yet," Mia said. Her voice was gentle, but not soft. "You've told me what you know. Ask me what you want to understand." A long pause. "Why?" Severa said. "Why didn't you tell me?" Mia looked at the fire for a moment. Then she looked at Severa directly. "Because I knew exactly what would happen the moment I did. Every piece of honest counsel I had given you would have been buried under one question. Is she trying to damage my bond? Is she doing this for her own benefit? An unmated female, with a history of almost, with a known connection to the Alpha King, has no credibility in that conversation. Not in this pack. Not in most packs. I have spent 4 years not becoming that particular story. I was not going to hand anyone the material to write it." She paused, then continued, steady, not defensive, the way you speak when you are simply saying true things and you know they are true. And beyond that, every single word I gave you over those weeks pointed you toward yourself, not toward his failures, not away from him, toward what you were feeling, toward what you were allowed to name, toward your own knowledge of your own life. If I had wanted to damage your bond, I would have done the opposite. I would have pointed you toward his faults, toward the version of events most favorable to me. I didn't do that. And I believe, she said quietly, that you already know that. I believe you knew it before you walked through this door this morning. Severa was quiet for a long time. She was looking at Mia with the expression of someone who has come into a room with a fully formed judgment and is discovering, unwillingly, that the thing they came to judge is more complicated than the judgment accounted for. She picked up her cloak from the chair where she had draped it. She moved toward the door, not storming, just moving with the careful deliberateness of a person who is too full for more words and needs to leave before they say something they do not mean. At the threshold, she stopped. She did not turn. Her voice came very quietly into the morning air of the ward. Was any of it real? The mornings, the tea, the conversations. Were you actually my friend, or was it something else? Mia looked at the fire. She let the question sit in her fully before she answered it. And the answer, when she looked at it directly, was the simplest thing in the whole complicated morning. Yes, she said. That was the most real thing in all of it. The door closed. The ward was quiet. The fire was the only sound, and the pendant was still on the table. Mia sat with the morning for a while, with its pale light, its cold, its particular weight of a thing that has finally been spoken aloud after years of being carried in silence. She felt the difference. It was not relief, exactly. It was more like the feeling of putting something down that you have carried so long you had forgotten it was not part of your body. She reached out and picked the pendant up. She looked at it. The worn, smooth curve of the bone, the careful letters, the years of handling that had made the surface almost soft. She set it in the small clay dish at the edge of the work table, where she kept things waiting to be returned or addressed. Then she went back to her work. Her hands were steady. They had always been steady. That evening, Cody Draxon came to the ward with a meal she had not asked for, and had not known she needed. Warm bread and stewed root, wrapped in cloth, carried with the matter-of-fact ease of someone who does not make a performance of caring for people. He set it on the work table without ceremony. He sat across from her. He said, "You look like someone who told the truth today." She looked at him. "Is it that obvious?" he said. "Only to me." They ate together while the fire built itself into warmth around them, and the pack settled into the quiet of evening outside. And for the first time in a very long time, longer than she had realized until now, sitting in this simple warmth across from this particular person, the quiet around her felt like rest rather than absence, or like something she had been given rather than something that had been left behind. The silence lasted 5 weeks. Mia did not chase it. She had too much experience, the kind acquired through difficult years rather than theory, with the difference between a silence that means ending and a silence that means the harder, more interior work of a person deciding who they are and what they are willing to hold. She gave it the full 5 weeks. She showed up to the ward every morning. She counted the frost days as they came and thickened. She walked the eastern trail on clear mornings when the air was clean and cold and the forest quiet. She went on being herself with the same steady attention she had brought to it for 4 years. In the same weeks, she watched, at a distance, what was happening to Alexander Nightclaw. She watched it the way you watch weather approaching across a valley, with the clear, unblinking attention of someone who has already made their peace with the outcome and is simply observing. She did not seek the information. It arrived the way information in a pack always arrives, through corridors, through the edge of conversations she was not part of, through Orvella who mentioned things without emphasis, because Orvella had decided long ago that the most useful thing she could do with information was share it plainly and let people decide what to do with it. He was not cruel. She needed to say that plainly, even now, even here, because fairness was something she had decided to keep, regardless of what it would have been easier to give up. Alexander Nightclaw was not a cruel man. He was something more common and, in its way, more disappointing, a man who was extraordinarily gifted at acquiring things and genuinely poor at tending them once acquired, a man for whom the beginning of things, the approach, the attention, the first brilliance of a new connection, came as naturally as breathing, and for whom everything that came after the beginning required an effort he had never quite committed to learning. His council sessions grew longer and less decisive. 2 of his Eastern alliances, built on the considerable foundation of his personal charm and early goodwill, rather than on the less glamorous foundation of consistent follow-through, had developed cracks along lines that those who had been watching carefully had seen coming for months. 3 ranked wolves who had served his campaign in the Northern Territories submitted requests for reassignment to the border posts. He accepted them with the puzzled air of a man who does not understand why people leave. He did not understand yet that authority and trust are different things. That authority is granted by title and held by position, but trust must be earned in small and unglamorous ways over a long time, must be renewed daily in the attention you give and the honesty you maintain, and the willingness to show up when showing up is not convenient or comfortable. He had always been good at the showing up that was easy. He had never made peace with the rest of it. He had also, according to Orvella's simple, unemphasized mention, come to the healing ward one afternoon during the 5 silent weeks. He had asked after Mia. She had not been there. She had been on the Ridge Trail, the high one that overlooked the valley, the one she walked when she needed to think from a distance. He had left no message. He had simply come and found her absent and gone. She absorbed that information. She set it in its place. It told her where he was, what he was doing, what he was beginning to feel the shape of. It did not create an obligation. She had spent 4 years being accountable to his absence. She was not going to spend 4 more being accountable to his presence. On a cold morning in the 5th week, Zavira appeared on the Eastern Trail. Mia was walking it alone, as she usually did in the mornings when the first appointments were done, and the ward was stocked, her steps easy and regular on the frost-hardened ground, the forest quiet on either side, yet the cold air doing the useful work of clearing her head and making the world feel very simple for a little while. She heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Zavira was coming at an even pace, her breath showing in the cold, her dark cloak pulled close. She had not rushed. She was not breathless. She came to walk beside Mia, as if this were simply where she intended to be. And they walked together for a while without speaking, through the curve in the trail where the tree line thickened, past the flat rock where the pack's children left offerings on moon nights, along the section of path where the river came close enough to hear. After a while, Zavira said, "I spoke to the Elder Council last week." Mia listened. "I am beginning the process of dissolving the bond." She said it the way you say something you have said first in your own head many times, and are now saying for the first time aloud, clearly, without rush, without the apology that it might have come wrapped in months ago. My father will not take it quietly. Alexander will be more difficult still. The pack will have its opinions, as it always does. But I have decided. She paused, not for hesitation, but for precision, choosing her exact words. That I would rather have one hard season than a long life that gets smaller every year. Mia looked at her. This young woman, 22 years old, at less than 2 years inside a bond that had been made for political reasons by people who believed that what you come from is more important than what you need, standing in the cold morning air of the Eastern Trail, speaking her own life back to herself, clearly, without apology. "Yes," Mia said. Zavira looked at her sideways. "Just yes?" "Completely yes," Mia said, "with everything in me." They walked on. The trail curved toward the river, and they followed it, walking beside the water, as it moved cold and wide and indifferent through the frost-hardened banks, carrying the last of the fallen leaves southward in its current. The forest was quiet around them. The morning held. After a while, Zavira said, "Everything you gave me over those weeks, every single piece of it, pointed me toward myself. Not toward him, not away from him, even. Toward what I already knew, what I had been afraid to name because I didn't think I was allowed to." She glanced at Mia with the particular expression of someone who has been reconsidering a judgment and has reached the far side of it. A female who wanted to damage my bond would not have done that. Mia said nothing. She walked beside the river and let it be true. "Don't keep things from me again," Zavira said. Not a demand, not a request either. the tone of someone who has learned the difference between what they will accept and what they will not, and has chosen to name it plainly, rather than let it sit unspoken until it becomes something harder. It was a boundary and an offering held in the same breath. I am still here, and here are the terms. I won't, Mia said. She meant it in the full and specific way of someone who has understood the cost of the alternative and chosen something better. She meant it the way you mean the true things, without performance, without even needing to think about it, just from the place in the chest where the real answers live. Zavira was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled. Small, real, the tiredness in it not erasing the genuineness of it, but sitting alongside it, the way honesty and relief often sit alongside each other. The first real smile Mia had seen from her in over a month. Perhaps the most real one she had seen from her at all. Good, she said. They turned back toward the pack territory together as the morning opened fully around them, the frost catching the light where the path curved into open ground, or the river singing its cold, unhurried song at their side. And if this trail had a history, if there had once been a different version of Mia who walked it beside different company, believing something that would not keep the shape she had given it, that version was not gone. She was simply further back, quieter, standing in the past where she belonged, and the trail was still the trail, and Mia was still walking it. Going further, the difficult weeks that followed Zavira's decision were not simple. Zavira's father, Kaelric Grimfang, arrived from the Dreadfang territory with the controlled fury of a man who had made a careful investment and has just been told it is being returned. He was not a gentleman in negotiation, and the Elder Council sessions that followed were long and occasionally very loud. Or there were mornings when Zavira came to the healing ward, looking like someone who had held herself together through something and needed to put the effort down, even briefly, before picking it back up. Mia made tea. She listened. She said the true things, and she kept nothing back, and the mornings were not easy, but they were honest. And honesty has its own particular kind of warmth. Alexander did not fight the dissolution the way his council had feared. He received the news with the expression of a man who had known something was coming and had simply been waiting to learn its exact shape. He asked for one meeting alone. He got it. What passed in that meeting, Zavira shared afterward in careful pieces. He had not argued. He had not begged. He had said at some point in the conversation, or that he had made choices he could not fully account for, and that he regretted the cost of them to people who had not deserved to bear it. Zavira had thanked him for the honesty and asked him to leave. He did not come to the healing ward again. Mia noted his absence, the way she noted things she had once waited for, and no longer needed, with the particular piece of something that has found its right size. That evening, an evening in the 6th week, after a long day of practical preparation and a quiet supper with Orvella, who had said nothing critical and everything encouraging, Mia found Draxon waiting outside the healing ward. He was not pretending to have an injury. He was not performing a casual arrival. He was simply standing at the edge of the ward path, leaning against the old stone post, watching the last of the light leave the sky with the ease of a man who has nowhere he needs to be and has chosen to be here. He looked at her when she came down the path. His face was easy in the way it always was, not performing ease but simply having it, the natural settled quality of someone comfortable inside their own skin. "Walk with me," he said. Not a question. She recognized the tone, the particular directness of someone who has decided to stop circling something and simply say it. She recognized what it was offering, underneath the words, and she felt, clearly, without alarm, with the quiet steadiness of someone who has tested their own ground and found it solid, that she wanted to say yes. She got her cloak, They walked the eastern trail as the territory settled into dusk around them, the sky going that deep navy it goes for 20 beautiful minutes in late autumn before becoming fully dark. The first stars appearing above the tree line like quiet announcements. He asked her which herbs grew on the north-facing slopes. She knew all of them, and she told him. He asked whether she had ever climbed the high ridge in first frost to see the valley spread below in white. She had. She described it to him. The particular silence of that high place, the way the whole pack territory looks small and comprehensible from that height, the way cold air at that altitude has a quality of clarity that flat ground can't produce. He listened with the specific attention of someone storing something worth keeping. Then he said, "I'd like to see it with you sometime, the ridge at first frost, or I think I'd like to see it with you." He said it simply, without flourish, without the careful artfulness of a man constructing an impression. Just a true thing, said plainly, that he would like to be beside her when she saw something she had seen alone, because he suspected it would be a different and better thing with her there. She looked at him. The trail curved ahead. The frost was beginning in the grass at its edges. "Ask me again when the frost comes," she said. He said, "I will." She believed him. She noted clearly that the believing did not feel like the old kind, the kind that held itself in suspension, that had a breath it was afraid to take, that waited for proof before it could settle. It felt like something else entirely, something that sat differently in the body, lighter, more air beneath it. It felt like choosing. Later that night, alone in the healing ward as she banked the fire and put the morning's preparations in order for the next day, Mia thought about Alexander. She let herself. She looked at the thought directly. He surfaced in her mind the way things from the past surface sometimes, not from thought, but from the body first, a recognition before the naming. The grey eyes. The quality of his attention in those 2 seasons when they walked the eastern trail, and she believed something that was going to cost her. The feeling of being the specific person he had chosen to be near. She thought. That happened. All of it exactly as she remembered. She was not going to revise it for her comfort. It had been real on the surface of it, and it had cost her something she could not fully name even now, as because waiting has costs that don't resolve neatly into language. The years cost her. The silence cost her. The lack of a single honest word from him, across 4 years, through everything she had felt and carried and done in the absence of that word, cost her. She held that. She let it be true. And then she thought about what else it had done, what the cost had built. It had built the healer who could sit across from Zevira Grimfang on a cold morning and say you are allowed, and mean every syllable of it, from a place of direct and unglamorous experience. It had built the woman who could carry a hard truth for 6 weeks out of genuine care for someone who had not, at first, seemed like a person she would ever be given reason to protect. It had built the woman who could open a door on a grey morning, when the knock was from someone she had every reason to resent, and step aside and say, "Come in, let me look at it." She would not have chosen what it cost, but she was not going to stand in the healing ward in the quiet night and pretend the shape it had made of her was bad. The fire settled to coals. The ward was still. Outside the window, the frost was setting in for the night, spreading its careful work across the courtyard stones, without hurry, without announcement, just doing what frost does, quietly and completely, in the hours before the world wakes to notice it. She had waited 4 years for the wrong person. The right ones had found their way to her door. Not the life she had imagined at 20, standing at the tree line in the late autumn, believing in grey eyes that held everything you said and brought it back to you. But hers, completely, Finally, entirely hers. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needed to hear it. And if you have ever kept your hand steady when everything in you was shaking, this story was always about you.